The way I've thought to do it is to have three moments in the story that we can discuss. So the first one we're going to discuss is Aeneas abandoning Dido, and the second one is going to be Aeneas going to the Underworld and there being a place for the good and also a place for the bad. And then the third thing we're going to discuss is when the son chooses to fight for Rome rather than to look after his mother. And then actually the fourth one is we're going to have when Aeneas gets to take Lavinus, who is Turnus's fiance.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
How different is like point 3 and point 1 from an existentialist understanding? Like, I do think they fit into the same category, no?
I agree. I think there are...
Because I wanted also to discuss cultural assimilation, for instance.
Yeah, so what, are you saying that we should maybe move the Underworld to... Well, 1, 3 and 4, choosing one thing over another, they're all existentialists. You saying we should move the Underworld to a different place?
I'm happy with the Underworld. But, yeah, maybe that's...
Okay, we'll start with the Underworld.
Exactly, great. Perfect.
But the reason why I chose the other path, BTW, even though I do agree that thematically it makes more sense like this, is I'm following the structure of the story.
But we're also following Victor's...
Yeah, I know, but we've swapped it around. We've swapped it around. Okay, so we're gonna start with Aeneas going to the Underworld, and to frame it in the previous discussions about the Iliad, when you go down into the Underworld, everyone is in the same place. It doesn't make a difference whether you're good, bad, or otherwise. You endure the same fate, except you get to... Whether or not it's pleasant is based on the life that you've lived. Whether you've been glorious as you go into death. Whereas when Aeneas arrives in the Underworld, there's the Elysium, and then there's also Tartarus. Exactly. And so the question I'm putting out there which is the same question we were asking when we were listening to the Iliad, is what does that mean for us if we were Roman as opposed to being Greek? How does that structure change the way that we live our lives?
So the thing I was thinking when you were talking about that and how Virgilio was actually making this difference, I was just thinking how this relates to a different way of understanding society in a more maybe, and I can be completely wrong, please you correct me, like in a more vertical way, rather than the Greeks having a more horizontal and more fair society. I don't know if I'm wrong. You know my point?
Well, you think that because everyone goes to the same Underworld, that therefore it's a more equal society?
Yeah, somehow.
More equal by what measure?
More horizontal, I would say.
By what measure?
What do you mean?
Well, equal by virtue, or equal by wealth, or equal by status?
By status, I guess.
By status.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, potentially. I mean, I see it more that it's the trouble with not having a difference between Elysium and Tartarus is that as you're acting out your life, there's no incentive to behave in a particular way outside of glory or your memories. Whereas if you're thinking, actually, if I do this bad deed, I'm going to go and spend the rest of my existence in Tartarus, it makes you hesitant.
But why is that any different? You're still doing it not because the act is good itself. You're still doing it for a reason that's selfish, whether it's glory or you get a better afterlife or whatever it is.
Doing what?
Being good or bad. You're not doing an act purely because it's good.
You're doing it for the reward that you're going to get. Yeah. Well, you'd rather have it just as intrinsic.
Yeah.
Can I check my understanding on the first one? Briefly.
Yeah.
Because you said in the first one it's not partitioned.
Yes.
My experience from something there is based on the life I've led. If I'm a good chap, then I have a better time. If I'm a bad chap, I have a bad time.
No, the first one, it's the experience you have. It's all this going to be the same world. The same mountains.
But if you're bad, though, you're getting tortured, or we just like...
No, it's more that if you're bad, it's more like, let's say, Agamemnon, his wife with a new lover kills him. So he has to spend the rest of his life feeling like his wife has betrayed him. in the underworld. So it's more the memories that you have to live with.
So it's actually
Yeah, but the one who does the deed, so the man who kills him, doesn't then go to a different place. They're both hanging out in the same room.
He still gets to sleep with the wife, and
Well, I don't know whether they're having sex in the underworld, but they're certainly. Yeah,
Everyone has to sit
watch
in
it.
the same
I
room.
remember that's the reverse, isn't it?
yeah, they all have to be
Double
together.
punishment, yeah.
But isn't
yeah,
just
double
like
punishment.
relating to our a Christian tradition, where unfortunately our underworld life is much more important than our proper life. So maybe
Well, you think that's what this is doing?
really,
He's moving in that direction.
definitely.
Certainly gives you a reason to want to be good if you're going to get into Tartarus if you're bad, doesn't it? More of an incentive, I think.
Which is the foundation of the Christian
Yeah,
tradition, isn't it?
yeah, definitely.
The fact that you have to behave in this life so you can get
Yeah,
You don't see
a
it from,
rewarding underlife, which maybe wasn't like that before for the Greeks.
I think it's related to that, like that sort of sense of spirituality, but I do think it's related without knowing at all, like to a sense of political organization of the society. I do think it's somehow related, like how Homer was actually writing this in and for that I would love to know more, about the cultural, actually, like the historical thing. But I do read it, or I didn't get it, like from that, like if Homer was actually writing this, only like there is this, what was the word?
Tartarus.
The one. Is that the one?
Hades. Wait, what do you mean?
But actually the concept of pietas is very linked to
No, I know.
having an underworld that that you are going to be judged and assessed for your life one day. That's, I think it's very much linked with the concept of pietas, which is inexistent. There is no place for pietas in Homer. Maybe that's why. It's more about moderation for the Greeks. They don't even, you said that Odysseus is a hero for in the Odyssey, and I disagree, because for the Greeks, I can know how to say it, but for the Greeks, they really insist on moderation. So for them, being moderated in your life was the most that you could achieve, which is completely different for the Latin culture, I think.
So you don't think Odysseus would have been celebrated as a hero when that
No,
book
it's
came
not
out?
celebrated as a hero at all.
Even when it was released?
It is more when you overcame, when you were not moderated anymore, when you cheated, when you were led by your passions, you did wrong. That's why you got punished. So he stayed 10 years without get back home and overcoming all dangers and stuff. So yeah, I think it's about that. But I don't know if maybe I didn't make myself clear.
No, I'm just thinking about it, because just to frame the conversation, Odysseus spends 10 years trying to get home after he's been fighting against the Greeks, and during that time he does a lot of trickster behaviour, because he finds a way around. For instance, he's got 100 suitors who all fall in love with his wife Penelope, and she's faithful. She's not going forth with any of them, and in order to win, he knows he's not as great as Achilles. He can't have a fight with the sword and win. So he decides to trick them by taking away all of their weapons and locking the doors. So it's essentially an unfair fight. And some people look at the story, as you're saying, and say that he's not a hero because he was excessive, especially towards women in the 10 years before he gets home. He spends loads of time with, who is it? With Circe, yeah, which he really shouldn't have been doing. Well, do you see Odysseus
But
as a
also
hero?
with Calypso,
Joe, do you see?
Yeah, he does.
Do you
and
see?
Dido, he laid with Dido as well.
Yeah.
Do you remember
Joe,
that?
do you see
Yeah.
Odysseus as a hero?
I think So yeah, because I just thought Odysseus was that's the story about the spite of the gods, where he pisses off Poseidon and he's sent on a 10-year adventure. Because of that, because he's annoyed with the gods, it's kind of the opposite of Aeneid, where fate is on Aeneas' side, and Odysseus is conspiring against it, and he is the kind of human brain and cunning fighting against the spite of the gods. So I'd always thought, yeah, he sort of represented rationality and cunning rather than this sort of trickster. It's different, and then, I think you've got to be careful about interposing modern or like non-ancient things in terms of morals on that wouldn't have necessarily, his dalliance with Circe wouldn't have necessarily made him not a hero, because in that time piety and things were seen as something that women had to do. So Penelope is the epitome of the faithful wife, and he's this sort of caravan who can go around and look about.
But that's not viewed that negatively back then. That's fine.
I think you're right. It come the time of Virgil, it's definitely viewed more negatively, and actually that was Augustus' whole thing, was about piety and honour and duty over, and so that's when the Romans are more. He brings in this sort of age of moderation and non-excess, where and it's all a reaction to what they thought was the golden era before, and that all the civil war that predated the Aeneid was going around at the time just before the Aeneid was written with Augustus fighting Mark Antony and all that stuff. It was all a sense that it was slipping into chaos and sort of Greek, always associated with the Greek culture, sort of chaos and effeminacy. And so they need to bring it back and make it more about being pious and dutiful.
And it links very nicely to the Underworld at that stage.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Do good things, get a good afterlife.
It's
The old
just
version was like, have a bit of a life, do whatever you like. If you die during it, then it doesn't really matter that much. To some degree, you end
and
up
it's
in
just about what good is in the sense of in Roman time is not like
different.
So I have this
Christian.
question, which is related to what you're saying, I guess, and what you also mentioned. It's like this, if you could explain a bit more about this part of cultural assimilation. I think it's somehow related, no?
Yeah.
So what you're... So if
Well,
you could show a bit more, because I would like to know more about that. Also, but it's...
Yeah.
And it's also from where I'm coming, of course from a very contemporary perspective, because I don't know anything about Phoenician.
The Romans shamelessly took Greek culture and were sort of obsessed with it, from architecture to literature, and were like, even I think internally thought of themselves as a martial race without much learning to them, the Romans. So they were warlike race and had been born out of that, and they were an efficient war machine, but not a centre of learning in the way that Greece was. So the Aeneid is supposed to be, this is what I was told, it's the national anthem of Rome, basically. So it's there. It's like Greece has these two epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the Aeneid is supposed to be a combination of both, but spoken Roman, and it's their kind of, so it's them saying taking the epic poetry, which is a Greek thing, and saying we can do it better, and it's going to sing to our values, which is about being martial and honourable.
And doing it for Rome as well, which you don't get. You
can't forget the celebratory function of the Aeneid, so maybe that's...
Celebratory, what do you mean?
That Virgil was writing, to celebrate the Imperatore.
Okay, yes.
Yeah,
Exactly. But that's all about
So it's completely different, because Homer, if he ever existed, he didn't write from that perspective.
Yeah, it's
So
propaganda.
another thing.
But the Aeneid, in a way, it's actually cultural assimilation of that, no? No?
Yeah, maybe, but it's the purpose of the work is completely different.
Yeah, that is a big thing, which I didn't mention, really, is that he's writing the Aeneid to help propagate Roman culture and values and instill in everyone the idea of
Yeah, I
of
think he
Roman
was
rule.
also economically like supported by
Economically,
Augusta. Yeah,
for sure, yeah.
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 Yeah, he was-
Completely,
he was
it's another perspective.
Patron of Virgil.
Mm.
Yeah.
But he still didn't do like that bit when he sends Aeneas through the gate that is the ivory gate. That's the gate of dreams. It's not true. Like that's a moment where Virgil is undermining like everything that is being said prior to that, because if it's the gate of dreams and deceit, how can you trust anything that's been said previously? How can you trust that it is going to be Augustus going on to found Rome if the person who's saying it is going through the gate of deceit? So
That's quite because it's such a. And I think the book is listed with things like that, where he's sort of saying it actually is sort of. Is this all is this all lies and propaganda that I'm having to do, because otherwise I've been told to write this poem effectively, which is why I've got to write it in a certain way.
Yeah, Homer's works are much more truthful.
And he subverts it slightly throughout it.
okay, I'm going to move it on to Aeneas abandoning Dido. Okay, because we've done the Underworld now, and yeah, more or less, Aeneas is being distracted. He's not being pious because he's not helping to go and found Rome. He's being lustful by spending time with Dido, his lover, who's the Carthaginian queen, the enemy of Rome. So he shouldn't, or at least of the Latins. So he shouldn't be with her, and she shouldn't be with him. And he leaves her, and he says, "Is it fair? I say, is it fair?" He says, he says, "I made for Italy, but not of my free will." And I'm wondering, like, what we think now of that excuse. Bear in mind, privately, he had agreed to marry Dido. They'd never said it publicly. But privately, he said, "Look, I'm going to spend the rest of my life with you. I'm going to marry. It's going to be great." And then he has some sort of feeling like he needs to go and do something else. So he leaves her and says, "It's not of my free will."
Is that explained a bit at all in the book? What was the incident that made him suddenly decide time to go?
I can't remember, but I have a feeling what usually happens is that a god disguised.
That's what I'm kind of thinking. Did a god?
Yeah, someone comes down and like whispers in his ear, and I'm quite interested in that idea, because like we all have people whispering in our ears nowadays. It's our conscience. You're thinking to do something, and then you hear whispering. Like, "Are you sure you want to do that? Like X, Y, and Z." But to the Greeks and the Romans, that like, "Oh, you sure you want to do that X, Y, and Z?" It's always a god.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, which I think is really brilliant.
Yeah, also thunders. They
Also-
thought they were gods.
What they thought, what were?
Thunders.
Oh, thunder.
Yeah, they thought about. Yeah, they were gods like all the time.
Yeah,
Everything.
I'm
yeah.
not surprised. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I still do sometimes think thunder's. Yeah. So is it? I suppose the question is like, let's say we're in a breakup right now, and someone and you go, "Look, I'm leaving you, but it's not my free will. I just have to leave." Like, what would be your response?
You're missing a big point there. He's leaving for a bigger cause, which is good for the whole society, apparently, no?
Yeah.
For a bigger portion of society, which is linked to the other thing of the mother.
But if he'd stayed with the girlfriend, he could have, by marriage, he could have brought the two sides together.
No,
And he could have brought Carthage in line with
Is it
potentially.
Was it possible?
that's
Yeah.
the thinking.
I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, you kind of think it's fine. If I went home tonight and said to my wife, "You know what, I'm off, because it's not my choice, but I'm going to go and found a civilization and start a city." 2,000 years down the line, when I had founded Rome, the rest, I think my wife would be like,
He's gonna
"Fair
tell his
cop."
wife tonight.
If I did. With the benefit of hindsight, I think you're like, okay, you did found Rome, that's quite impressive. But like, I think most people who do that, like, most poor fathers and husbands who just disappear in the night and claim it's not their own fault, don't found Rome. So with the benefit of hindsight, I'm sort of like,
Dido hadn't killed herself. Quite annoyed, going like, "I'm just here with Turnus's bird."
I know, Lavinium. You're like, who's she?
Finding Rome at all.
But there will always be a contrast between public and private interests, I think. Like, the time, every time, right? No?
So what do you mean?
That it's just, you know.
It just is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he just says it's the
Just,
public. He just says, oh, it's the public interest.
It's
So
it's just like, you know, a truth, a general truth. It's almost.
I guess we still value that in the same way today. There's plenty of stories from drastic things like the Second World War, but even now, even things like when pandemics hit, or even people's jobs, often they leave their family to go and do some noble cause. It might be like being a doctor or going fighting Ebola, or Obama choosing to spend more time working to be a good president than with his family. Still the same thing. It's just that I guess we value now fighting Ebola or being a good president. But back then, probably the noblest thing you could possibly do was found Rome. So it's probably the same, exact same thing. It's just.
yeah, well, especially the president one would be really linked to the idea of piety, because he's helping build the American state.
But then again, how altruistic or like selfish a decision like that is, because still it's about, you know, your personal, you know.
Exactly, that's what I
fame and
agree.
power
I
and
agree.
stuff like
My
that,
endorse
right?
that I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna be with you forever or whatever. Like,
But
that's
also,
where he went
was
wrong.
he really
Should
doing
not
it like,
both.
you know, for
Yeah.
like, you know, history, or was he doing it for himself, like that he wanted to be the founder of Rome and he thought he was meant to do that and blah blah blah.
You
So
can go
maybe
anywhere.
he was,
You can
yeah,
get
he was a
that's
selfish,
the altruism
you know,
thing. There was a
call
whole.
again
You can go
eventually,
anywhere.
right?
You
Yeah.
could say even
Maybe
somebody
he was
who
in,
does-
yeah, he was
you could
really
say
in
even
love
somebody
with
who does the
Dido
most
at the
altruistic
end.
thing.
I'm
in the
more
world
naive
is,
and I tend to think that he did it for, actually for.
Was he naive? Not at all.
No, I'm naive.
Are you?
I tend to think that he actually did it for the public interest.
That's the argument with any altruism, though, that you can have. You know, even somebody who does the most altruistic thing you could possibly think of, like lays down their life to help somebody and knows that no one will ever find out. In that moment, they're doing it for selfish reasons.
That's very
Their
important. That's
cost-benefit
correct, yeah.
analysis internally is still tipped in their favour. They're doing what suits them. They're just a bit fucked up with how their scales work.
But he probably didn't even know himself. I bet he was torn. I bet he was thinking, I'm having a great time with Dido,
Yeah.
and like maybe I should
What
be.
if I've just gone mad?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I should be building like a partnership between Latinium and Carthage.
Or maybe the alternatively, because you're putting your perspective on the relationship there to some degree, right? I mean, you might have been thinking that I'll do anything to get out of this, so
Yeah.
you might have hated it. You might be like, just doing my head in. Like, I want to go and do something different.
Yeah.
This is just a good excuse. I mean,
What did Dido say exactly immediately before that?
What did
Was she
Dido?
like, could you do the dishes in this?
Yeah, no.
I leave with my
so what about this marriage thing then? I've got to go. I've heard enough.
Yeah. Or he agreed to the marriage and then
Yeah.
she asked for something. He's like, whoa.
Already said marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably after he'd found Rome and stuff. They're like, God, you did a fucking great job there, but there's a bit of a black spot on your record where you left your wife. And he goes, I did that for a good reason.
Yeah.
I had a calling. I knew this was going to happen.
Got the image of him in a future job interview
Yeah.
in CV, founded Rome, did
Yeah.
break up with.
Yeah.
Like, ooh.
Yeah.
The next question is, like, should Dido kill herself?
No.
No.
Tough question.
Yeah, but to me it's the next one.
Should she? Who said yes?
Everybody saying that she didn't kill herself because of that.
The honourable
so
thing
I
to
want
do
to
is kill
hear
yourself.
that.
Yeah.
It's the right
Elaias
response.
says that it's
No,
not
she
because
She
didn't.
doesn't kill
She
herself.
killed
She never
herself
lost.
eventually because she betrayed her dead husband. She felt like
Before
no. She betrayed her dead husband with Aeneid.
Yeah.
So she felt so guilty about it.
Yeah, it's more complicated.
Of course,
than just
because
that.
he
So
left,
because of
right?
that,
If he
he's
wouldn't have, but she eventually killed herself because she betrayed the memory
And she
of her
betrayed
dead
Carthage,
husband,
yeah.
Sicheo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was maybe putting too much emphasis on,
Yeah.
which is a classic. You know.
She thought this.
Or maybe
Why don't
she
we say
killed
from-
herself because Aeneas left, but she just said that she would kill her. Yeah, she said she killed herself.
Sorry,
because
I know-
of her dead
I
husband.
know you don't like a contemporary view into this, but let's put a feminist perspective into it. And I think
Let's do it.
it's like
That's one of my
in the
favourite
end-
perspectives.
in the end it's like, of course she was the miserable woman without anyone, and
Yeah.
she had to kill herself because otherwise, I don't know, it's like a very patriarchal way of framing.
Yeah, I agree.
But with the extra colour,
Yeah.
with the extra colour on a bit of the backstory there, you can see that. I mean, she got with one of her sworn enemies and betrayed her husband's thing. She must have thought this is true. The only way I do that is because this is the real deal.
It's much more that.
And then he left, and she thought, I'm such, not because of him really, but like, I'm such a fool because to betray my husband and my culture.
Yeah, all the Carthaginians.
Yeah, and then
be wrong.
Then be no.
And then be wrong about it.
Exactly.
All the Carthaginians
Yeah.
were like, what have you been doing shacking out with Aeneas?
Yeah.
And then he's our sworn enemy.
Yeah, but-
And she's like, well, it's true love, so that's why I'm doing it. And all like, is it? And then he disappears.
It's a public duty thing.
You're right,
She
clown.
betrayed public duty.
But would it have
So when she dies, what do the Carthaginians think then?
Probably not in the literature.
When she's gone? Probably not in the literature.
No, but I mean, you don't. It is. They do pick the women to be the ones who kill themselves.
Also,
Yeah,
she
they
died
do.
in such a tragic way.
How does she?
How did she die?
She killed herself on the pira, she put, like that.
Self-immolation.
Oh, she burnt herself.
Yeah, no, not actually. I think she just like stabbed herself, but on the she built she had like built a pira like with all these like wooden wood stuff like when that like in Greeks they usually like burn people. How do you say cremate?
Yeah.
Seems a good idea.
I guess so.
So she killed herself on that, ready like to be cremated. Yeah, it's
In like a
very-
public.
So she put
It's
herself
very
in
dramatic.
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
that part of the Aeneid is very dramatic.
But then that's almost to say like, if it's a public thing, is it?
Yeah, of course, in front of.
That's almost like a look. I was so wrong.
And stuff like that.
This is my punishment for being so wrong. To have betrayed the popular.
Okay, so she's that's interesting.
It's almost
That's
It's
saying
very much a symbolic there.
Yeah,
It's
symbolic.
not like
It's like
about, like,
atoning for my mistake.
romance.
so. It's
not
really an
at all.
apology.
Almost,
But
yeah.
then you have suicide in like Christian theology, which is deemed to be a sin, because all life is sacred. So presumably, whenever they were coming up with the idea of the Bible, they must have thought about Dido's story and gone, no, like we don't accept her killing herself under any circumstances. She shouldn't have done it.
In fact, Dante in the Divina Commedia, he plays Dido in the hell, not in the limbo, with like all like suicidal people, because many people that kill themselves are placed like in a kind of limbo, like a middle way between like paradise and hell. But he put Dido in the hell because of her luxurious, like lush. Have like betraying her husband and then like laying with Ulysses and then laying with Aeneid.
God, she's had a rough one, hasn't she?
There is a very harsh, very harsh
summary for next time.
dreadful.
At least
Yeah,
Couple of months.
yeah, very much.
Okay, yeah, Dido, yes. Or Dido.
Yeah, so we end on poor Dido underlined on that part. So the third. Okay, guys, we're going to move on to the next part of the story. Again, it's still around choosing. So it's all about this sort of existential bend. So there's a moment where I think he's called Elaias is asked to go on essentially a suicide mission. It ultimately becomes to try and get through. He's trying to get through I can't remember which crew it is. Anyway, he's going on. He's just two of them, and he's trying to decide whether or not he should leave his mum for the greater good. He does leave his mum. He then dies. She gets wind of it, and she says, "My cruel son, you left me. Is this the comfort you kept for my old age?" He died in battle, and in this moment, and again in the Aeneas abandoning Dido moment, he's choosing the greater body for the smaller, like the mass for the private. Over the private. And what I'm wondering is should we have that as an absolute? Like, should it be the case that, because in this story always he's choosing the greater, he doesn't choose to look after his mum, but is that the way it should be? Should we have orders of piety? Is it more important to look after your state than it is to look after your family?
No.
I think up until really recently, yes, definitely. And I think as the kind of modern society's got more broken down into individual components.
Yeah.
And focusing on oneself, but also.
I think you're supposed to say that obviously the everyone else is much more important than my immediates, but in reality, I feel much more strongly about my immediates than the greater good. Probably.
You would look after.
I mean, you can only like parallel it with like, this is usually a contentious subject, but like when you talk about like private and state schools, like I don't have, like I would send my kids to private school.
Gone there.
I know.
Stick with law. Don't become a
And
juror.
like, I feel like that is like
Question two.
the number one argument about putting your immediates over the whole, you know, like the one that we can all like, well, that you can have some sort of like opinion on. But just say, yeah, I would pay for my immediates to have a better situation.
You're right. I agree. Think about how many like useless wars have been fought so far. There is a movie about like a film about a mother who lost in the Vietnam War. She's American, like 3 sons.
Oh, Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
Imagine.
I know.
So there is no point. Would you?
And then no one would ever go to war.
Be a joke. It's just like many wars were so useless and so. I really cannot find a word in English.
Also, the amount of men who died to get that one son is quite
Yeah, but
as well, in the story.
most of
at
the
least.
times, you know, we've been proven that, like, you know, many wars were, like, you know, fought for, like, personal interest eventually. So
True, that is a good point
it's
because
like, you know, yeah,
keep talking
concept
about-
of like motherland and like, you know, defending like your nation. It's today has really lost a lot. Don't you think so? Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know. Like, I am proud to be British, but it's not nearly as obvious. I feel like the general
But
current.
would you go to war for the UK?
Probably
I find
I
it
would.
very difficult to put it in such a
Like Boris Johnson.
I would, but you're doing it more as like a.
for me.
as a
What,
joint
to put
venture.
one into a dichotomy?
Like this, like it's like either this or this.
Yes. As in, you can't do it that way.
Huh?
Or as in, you can't see it that way.
I mean, the world doesn't work like that for me. So.
But I have it like nowadays. I feel
Right.
like you often hear people say you just need to look out. You need to look out for your own interests.
Well, that's what neoliberalism has done with society, right?
You think that's why you think it's neoliberalism.
I think it super relates to that.
Yeah.
And you need to, yeah, it's personal freedom and personal choice above the collectivism of. But of course, we can disagree, and we can agree to disagree. Of course, I'm not thinking that we need to be like.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And
Yeah.
like,
So I do think
Instagram
it's
culture
super
now is
related
about
to
self-love and looking after your own happiness.
I also think it's important as well because
Well,
you need
it's
to.
not-
But yeah,
become more
yeah. But I think it's right. Like you can't actually. It's when the dichotomy or the division is made. It's partly for the sake of having a conversation, but fundamentally, there's always going to be both in play. In any relationship, you can have it in like a romantic relationship. There's the unit, which is the two, and then there's also the two individuals, the one and the one. And should you be acting for your own interests, or should you be acting for the other person, or even for the unit as a whole?
I guess sustainability is an interesting argument on that because it ties into the whole Instagram culture and stuff, but lots of big fashion around doing things that are sustainable and doing sustainable practices, which you might promote or you might not, but that would be something that is not going to benefit you whatsoever, but
Yeah.
is for the good of whatever, you, your family, the world, whoever.
Yeah, because that's even beyond a state. That's then giving the planet a statehood.
Yeah.
Planetary piety.
You obviously, it's not an absolute. You obviously have to care about the bigger picture, otherwise we're all going to descend into like madness. Like you need to give a shit about the external, but I don't think it's like there's not an absolute of like whether you one or the other every time, case by case basis.
Yeah, well that's
Yeah.
what.
Yeah, it's just like
I agree
varying
with
degrees. Like if it's like your husband or wife, then you'd probably give like a hell of a lot, but still not everything. And then to your family. Like if one of your siblings lost their job and never worked again the rest of their life, would you give them 50% of your salary? Like, you probably wouldn't. And it goes in varying degrees, and before you know it, you know, you've got your county or your country, and then you've got Europe, and then before you know it, like, even the amount of money we spent tonight on booze could go an extremely long way to small families in other countries and stuff, but it feels so far away, and it feels like a degree of separation that, yes, if they're in the room, we'd probably be like, fuck, I need to help you, but we're like...
Let's have another glass of wine.
You don't see it. It doesn't exist, right?
Exactly,
No.
Yeah, I think I do agree that ultimately it comes down to circumstances. It's an individual decision. But I got really obsessed with the existentialist angle, which comes before neoliberalism, which was more about like living your truest destiny, not what you're told to do, but what you ought to do for yourself. So, you know, that some say you need to get a job, you need to have children, you need to get married. But the existentialist says, well, why do you have to do any of those things? Like, what about X, Y, and Z? The thing that affects, the reason why I'm like quite sort of uncomfortable with that is you get so into it, you're never doing anything for the sake of it being good. You're just doing it for the sake of it being like an existence, your deepest destiny. Whereas, at least with the Romans, they had piety as a good, so that's why those existential decisions were being made. Whereas in more modern existentialism, and later becoming neo-liberal economics, there isn't really like a good outside of maximizing your own utility. Which is pretty basic, like maximizing your own utility. There are no like levels within that.
And where do the Sartre instincts come from?
Why did he say that?
Well, why did he say it? But also, where does he think like innate instinct? Trust your instincts to make a decision.
Well, it's like
so you can't do that in a vacuum outside of your cultural.
Well, exactly. I think that's what he's saying. It's like existentialism is existence. So it doesn't exist outside of existence. It's not a law that you can just like transport to another reality in another universe. It's this one. So that's why he's saying it relies on the instincts, and it's a case by case basis.
I know. I think Joe's saying like what you think is your instincts. You're like, oh, what do I just want to do for myself? But those have probably come from my parents and the world I grew up in and stuff. It's probably said, this is a good way to live your life, this isn't a good way, these are good things to do. So when I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do stuff for myself, the things that I think are good for myself and I want to do have probably been shaped by...
Like you say, I'm not going to do that thing that I'm told to do. You're just falling into the same trap.
Yeah, no, they have, but they might be quiet voices. You know, there might be some... Yeah, like
maybe. I mean, most people have the same beliefs as their parents.
But the tendency is toward individualism and liberalism, because if you think about like how many states are like giving up on like making the military service mandatory, that's something. I mean, it means that the trend is toward like no. I mean the concept of nation is fading away, and like over like globalization, so we don't feel. Maybe you in Britain, in the UK do feel, but we don't feel, that the concept of like, defending your nation, like going to war, like, to defend your, like, confine, you know what I mean? Yeah. So the tendency is toward like more like liberalism and like individualism. So this like idea of like collectivism is kind of like fading away a bit.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say so much like that. So now I'm thinking that actually we don't need to see the option of whoever that was like as an altruistic option, because I do think that if we think that the Aeneid and Virgilio was writing this mandated by I don't know who, this is somehow also creating a discourse, and a discourse of the empire. And so this was like the discourse to say, okay, this is the way to do it, because you see what I mean? Like,
you're saying it's prescriptive. Like it's a guide. I'm not.
No. So what I'm saying is that we are putting this again as like the individual choice was not the altruistic option, and the other one was the altruistic option, right? We're putting this like as we are discussing it, or maybe I'm not getting that right.
Yeah.
But then we don't need to, or maybe we can go a bit beyond that and say actually that altruistic choice we need to think from where it's coming. It's coming from Virgilio, who is writing this, mandated by Caesar Augustus, I don't remember whom, and this is because of the empire, and there is like a rationale behind this, right? So there is a discourse that the Aeneid is actually selling. So, this is the altruistic, but actually, I don't know.
You're saying we can't trust the altruism.
Exactly. So, or we need to question it at least. You know, like in a way, like it's like an imperial discourse as the colonial understanding of development. Let's say, we're going to go and solve the problems of the underdeveloped world, but with our discourse, and this is the way to do it. Sorry, I'm making a big leap here.
That is what that is.
I do think it's like, we also need to question that a bit, right? Like, no, that's not the altruistic way, maybe. Like, no.
Yeah.
So in the end, let's go for it. No, we think you will not. No, but no.
Did he know he was going to die on this mission?
Which one? The suicide mission.
Yeah.
I don't think he knew he was going to die, but the odds were stacked heavily against him.
Right.
But the glory, and there's always, they still love glory. I have to say, I do like the idea of glory.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I do like. It's got into me as well. These stories are really getting into me.
Ulysses is he's the founder of the Julian clan. So he's Julius Caesar's. That's
Is
why
he?
it's called, because it's Julius. Is how you pronounce it.
Okay. Right. So he is the but he hasn't got. Has he got children at that stage? No?
He's Aeneas' son.
Yeah.
I always called it Ascanius.
Okay.
But he's the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, from Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
one, yeah.
Well done, guys.
If you read like Ovidio Metamorphosis,
Yes.
they say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well done, guys. That's why you're invited.
No, but it's not about.
What's that? No.
I mean, if you think about, for instance, Israel, they have 3 years mandatory military service for women and 6 year mandatory military service for men.
It's 6 years.
Yeah, and 3 years for women.
I thought it was a year.
I thought it was a year too.
No.
Wow.
So that's what I'm saying. It's like, our society
But
is
that's
tending towards more liberalism.
Is that good?
But are you putting that as an example towards collectivist? Sorry, that's
No,
building
no.
an ideology of Zionism.
No,
so,
yeah,
I don't know,
no,
like,
I'm saying, no,
I wouldn't
no.
look that. Sorry, maybe I'm.
No, I'm saying that our society has changed so much from that.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
There is, I strongly disagree with making the military service mandatory. Strongly.
Yeah,
Would you have that argument though with an Israeli person?
Yeah, of course.
Because they might say, as a counter argument, I imagine they might say, over the last 50, they might say some of our neighbours want to wipe us off the map, and over the last 50 years we've defended.
Yeah, I agree with
and
you.
they wiped the Palestinians. Sorry.
Oh no, I'm sure.
They live in fears, but if we leave
But
these
Not
fears,
all of them,
Yeah,
by the way. Not all
because
of
I
them.
guess-
for 6 years a mandatory military. No, maybe you did because you were a military one.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
So maybe you are the wrong.
But Virgil makes him
Why
up.
did you join? Why
But
did
I guess
you
I was
join the
thinking,
army?
I guess I was thinking compared to,
Henry coming to.
like us in Italy. Now, obviously, even 70 years ago it was different, but now we don't think anyone's going to come and wipe out our
Free
country.
Palestine.
So we, have these sorts of views about how we should live life and stuff. But in Israel, where they're still in that same mindset that this country was in only 70 years ago or something, they probably think about it a bit differently about that
No,
stuff.
I'm sure. No, they live in fear.
Yeah.
For sure. But
Yeah.
then again, I don't really, I really disagree with making the military service mandatory, no matter what the circumstances are.
Even if it's a world war.
Yeah, of course, it doesn't have to be mandatory. Really.
I don't know enough about it, but I bet it does increase the number of people who fight.
Violence, right?
No, it's not about that. I mean, like, you know, not like, you know, taking arms against someone is not always like, you know, the easiest choice. I think about all the immigrants that came to Italy in like recent years. Like many of them were like, you know, just like running from like, you know, their countries which were, you know, on war. So yeah, I think that, you know, yeah, everybody should make his own choice. Really.
Okay, we're going to go on to the fourth section.
Very well.
Yeah, I think in certain circumstances you have to have it as mandatory. Like that's why it's happened. Because the trouble is, you've got two states fighting against one another, and one state chooses to have mandatory conscription, and the other one goes it's all free will. The state that has it as mandatory wins. It's game theory. It's a shame, but that's why you end up being forced to play their hand.
Like right now, Ukraine's glad they've got conscription.
Oh, because they can
Very
get
much.
Russia.
Yeah.
But in your
Exactly,
description,
yeah.
you said that one had
They're more
mandatory,
glad
one
they're
had
friends with the
non-mandatory.
US.
If you got rid of the whole mandatory system, then
Yeah.
no one would have
I
mandatory.
know, yeah, if you just got rid of the mandatory system, it'd be fantastic, but because you always end up having two states,
Yeah.
you have to apply it to both, but you
Yeah.
can't do that because you're not managing both. That's the trouble. If you could have a global state, it would be great. Okay, we're moving on to the fourth.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Maybe. Or maybe not.
You're right.
Depends who's the president.
Yeah, but then when we were talking, but when we were talking about the sustainability thing, it was making me think a bit about a global state.
Yeah.
Because it is
Global problem.
On some issues,
yeah, it's like a global consideration.
Yeah.
I did always love that scene in Independence Day, when they all go out and they see the ships coming down in China and America and all over, and everyone's clapping and it's all together. Okay, this is the last point, which is linked to everything that we've been speaking about so far, which is when Aeneas essentially steals Turnus's fiance Lavinia, which is just another scandal that Aeneas has got himself into. He's like a trail of devastation, this guy. You know, but what I find interesting is that, again, it's blamed on fate. So Lavinia's father has heard an oracle that says his daughter, should marry someone with a foreign tongue, and he will end up becoming king. But this man hasn't arrived. So when Turnus presents himself to Lavinia, they form a pact. It's agreed they're going to get married, and suddenly Aeneas turns up out of nowhere with a foreign tongue, and Lavinia's father uses that to justify his decision to back Aeneas over Turnus. But
So it's the dad who.
But there was the dad, and then both sides end up. You know, that's why the war is waged. They tried to do it as a peace pact, and it's interesting because the two-state system, speaking of Israel, is that which is presented. So he goes, it's going to be one state for the Latins and another state for the Romans in the same land, and we'll have a truce over it. There'll be no fighting. And I can't remember like who fires first, but essentially they end up having a huge war, and then the war is ended when Turnus and Aeneas say, look, enough of everyone fighting on our behalf. This is between the two of us. Let's have a fight it out man for man. So the question I have is like, I'm not sure what question I have. I was thinking, like, under what circumstances is it okay to break a promise to leave your fiance? Because nowadays it's never going to be accepted. Mind you, my father.
No, I think it is encouraged, because before you actually make that, commitment to marriage, you need to be 100% sure. Like, break it before rather than after.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this isn't breaking it because you've like suddenly realised it's not the person for you. That this is like sort of I've got a duty or something.
Yeah.
Or do you think this is actually just like?
Well, I think this is like just suddenly
fancy you anymore.
finding someone better. It's
Right,
like,
I see. Yeah,
like, so this is cool, but he's not as brilliant as Aeneas.
Yeah.
But I do also think it's really interesting that these heroes keep becoming more and more grounded.
Human, yeah.
Yeah, like more approachable. Like nowadays,
I guess to go back to your the feminism argument on it, most of the women in this period of like history and at that time, they're like wives and baby makers. It's not like they're waging campaigns or wars. So for the woman, success looks like being betrothed to the most successful. A successful woman is somebody who pairs off with the most successful guy. So if she gets an opportunity to be betrothed to somebody else who's more successful, it's no different to one of the guys being given a bigger campaign or something.
Lavinia is very much. She's very much a trophy. Lavinia. Lavinia, yeah, definitely, isn't she?
She is a trophy, yeah, for sure. No, she is.
Turno and Aeneid, very much. Yeah.
It is a good,
Poor Lavinia,
yeah, it's a good point because Hector or Achilles, they want to fight the best fighter. What's that, Karen?
Can you explain a bit more like the context again, very briefly, because I really.
Well, between these two.
Yeah.
Well,
who decided not to?
Lavinia and Turnus are both living in Latium or Latium in Italy, which is in western middle Italy near Rome, and they've agreed they're going to get married.
Okay.
And the father has said, "I'm really cannot wait to welcome you into the family." And then he meets shining Aeneas, pious Aeneas, and he thinks, "Oh, this guy speaks a foreign tongue. I did once hear actually."
And he's more successful as
yeah, he's more successful. He's more successful. He's from Troy. Yeah, he's part of fallen Troy, and he's coming with saying he's fated to found Rome. So he says, "Sorry, Turnus, but we've got a better offer here." Yeah, so I think they're much more accepting in this story of all of this kind of stuff than we are nowadays.
Who decides? I want to understand who decides.
Oh,
he sees it as a good match, and she.
Okay.
She's not having much say in the matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Because as Eleanor says, she's essentially
that's why you
trophy.
say she's a trophy.
She's like, whoever
Maybe
wins.
She really wanted to get married to.
I mean, like these stories, like these epic stories are not very much like for women. Women usually are very much, relegated to like
They don't really do well in any stories until the
unless
last
you're a
100 years.
goddess. If you're a goddess, maybe.
Yeah.
But no, otherwise, no.
There is a lady called Camilla in this story who's a warrior. And she slays so many men. It's kind of extraordinary. There's a whole chapter where she rocks up and she's savage. She's like chopping off people's heads and all sorts.
That's pretty new because in the Iliad and the Odyssey there are no female warriors.
Exactly,
that's pretty new.
But Camilla is. And that's... She dies. A noble death. She does. I think it might be Aeneas who comes in and is like,
Sorry, I ruined women.
Yeah. But I was quite shocked when I read the story. Someone said to me recently something about how, because I was saying, oh look, we've got these strong female leads, or at least a strong female lead in the Aeneid, and he had studied classics, and he was saying, yeah, they were happy for her to be that hero, but that wasn't what women were meant to do.
But she's not Roman, is she?
She wasn't Roman.
She's one of Turnus's.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's alright for them, non-Roman women, to be kind of not pious and modest.
Yeah, but Roman women look after themselves.
Yeah.
Just pipe down, okay? Yeah.